On this month's edition of Connect New York, we are exploring economic development in the Empire State, including shining a spotlight on a major employer coming to Central New York. Don't go anywhere.
This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.
Connect New York is sponsored by James Jordan Associates Architects, providing professional architectural services to educational, commercial, and institutional clients throughout New York State. James Jordan Associates Architects, with offices in Richfield Springs, New York.
Geddes Federal Savings and Loan offers home loans, IRAs, money market, checking, and savings accounts.
Geddes Federal, how can I help you this morning?
Personal service. Get it at Geddes. Offices in Westvale Plaza and in Manlius.
Welcome to Connect New York. I'm David Lombardo, host of WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, a daily public radio show broadcasting from the state capitol. On this month's episode, we're going to consider economic development in New York, including what it costs to attract and retain businesses, building an environment that fosters job growth, and maintaining a qualified workforce. And before we dive into these issues with our panel of industry stakeholders and policymakers, we're going to highlight the story of Micron, which is the recipient of a recent $6.1 billion federal grant and is committed to bring thousands of high-tech jobs to right here in the Syracuse area. Connect New York producer Alec Ambruso has an update on this ongoing project.
Every square foot of Micron's massive expansion, the size of 40 football fields, will be built with good-paying union construction jobs, the largest PLA, progressive labor agreement, ever in American history.
We're bringing advanced chips manufacturing back to America after 40 years, and it's going to transform our semiconductor industry, a pillar of a modern economy. And it's going to create an entirely new ecosystem in research, design, manufacturing of advanced chips here in America. By the way, I know I get criticized for being the most pro-union president in American history, but guess what? The middle class built this country, and unions built the middle class.
We project that our investments will help create several tens of thousands of American jobs over the next 20 years, more than 50,000 jobs here in New York.
And it includes 9,000 permanent Micron manufacturing jobs right here in Clay. Not here, but near in Clay, just a little bit from here. Many of them paying, catch this, $100,000 a year. And it doesn't require a college degree.
The CNY Solidarity Coalition is an all-volunteer, grassroots, progressive social activist organization that was founded in January of 2017, shortly after the election. We support Micron because basically they're going to invest millions and millions of dollars into Central New York, and those investments cannot help but improve the local economy. We are just simply concerned about specific issues regarding jobs, workforce development, and housing for the underserved communities in Central New York.
In total, there's $500 million that is going to be invested in the local community, in the local workforce. Micron has already established a number of partnerships with local universities, local community colleges, to really build that pipeline of workers that is necessary to make this successful. It's also going to be transformational for individual people who, as a result of this, are going to have access to really high quality manufacturing jobs that are going to be family sustaining for years to come.
Overall economic landscape in Syracuse is not great, even though unemployment is not usually high. A huge percentage of the jobs that are actually held by people at the lower end of the economic ladder are low-paying service jobs. The fact is that in a highly automated facility like the Micron fab, there won't be an enormous number of jobs because a lot of the processes that go on there are highly automated, and a lot of the jobs that will be there are jobs for people with fairly high degrees of education. A large number of jobs that are actually going to come from will be the potential 40,000 I mean, I've seen the numbers, from 40 to 100,000 additional jobs that are going to be, servicing the Micron facility. And those are going to be local trades and contractors and suppliers and people who actually are delivering materials, et cetera.
Micron itself will hire 9,000 people to run these facilities. It'll take 4,500 workers to build the facilities. And then all of the suppliers, all of the equipment providers, all of the material providers, just a huge amount of economic activity will flow throughout the entire region.
We support unionization of the Micron facility. We think that union jobs are jobs that guarantee good paying jobs and guarantee good benefits. And those good benefits and good paying jobs basically benefit the entire community. So we are strongly in support of union organizing for the Micron facility. A lot of what they're doing is admirable in the sense that it will work towards creating those jobs, but I don't know if it's doing it at the level that we would like to see.
American manufacturing is back, and communities like Syracuse are writing the great American comeback story. That's what it is, a comeback story.
And now we're going to open things up to our panel, and we're joined in the studio by Kevin Eunice, COO and Executive Deputy Commissioner of New York State Empire State Development, Amy Desjardins, Executive Director of the Workforce Development Institute, and Rob Simpson, President and CEO of Center State CEO, an economic development organization based in Syracuse. So Kevin, as one of the chief architects for the deal that is bringing Micron to Central New York, what from that experience is relatable in other areas potentially when it comes to job growth? Or is this a unique experience that we should just cherish for what it is?
I think there were lessons coming in that were part of the Micron effort and process, and there's lessons coming out. And I think a couple of things that come to mind. The local, state, federal partnerships, right? We're all of us in a room working together, understanding what each other brought to the discussion, being open, transparent, and cooperating with each other. That sort of bipartisan effort was really, really critically important. I think that's something we can see, and we take it to the next project, to other projects, and that was really critical. I think the focus, particularly with a big project like this, around community investment, around making sure there's opportunities and targeted efforts around disadvantaged populations, workforce training. Micron is a great partner in terms of focus on workforce, right? Focus on diversity, focus on sustainability. So I think those two are big elements: local, state, federal partnerships, making sure there's a more robust package around the economic development, because it takes the entire ecosystem, especially of a project of this magnitude, to succeed.
Well, Rob, Kevin mentions the idea of this being a partnership and highlighting the local level, but it is the federal government and the state that's really responsible for making it rain, so to speak, when it comes to subsidies and tax incentives. So what do you see from the grassroots local perspective as the role for the community organizations to play in bringing major companies that are potentially bringing thousands of jobs to an area?
Listen, I want to give credit where credit's due. I mean, the federal government, without them, none of these major semiconductor investments happen in America. They continue to happen in Asia, and our national security and our economic competitiveness continues to be hampered. If it's not for the leadership of the governor and the state of New York and folks like Kevin, we aren't in a position to win this deal in New York State. But our local partners have played a really important role as well. Our county exec put a phenomenal site together. The taxpayers here in Onondaga County in central New York are making significant contributions to bringing this project to bear. And I think that one of the things that I want to emphasize in this discussion around recruiting Micron to central New York, there was a lot of opportunity to sell our community to this global company, right? And every place in America wanted to welcome Micron to their backyard. I think we took an approach, the team, right, the local, state, federal partners, took an approach that we were going to be very honest with Micron about the state of our community, the trajectory we're on, the work that we've done over the course of the last 10 or 15 years to turn our economy around and put us into a competitive position for a project like this. But we were not shy about articulating to Micron some of the challenges that we have in our community as well. Challenges like pretty significant racial and socioeconomic segregation, challenges like high rates of poverty, high rates of childhood poverty. And what was fascinating about that back and forth, that conversation, in our discussions with Micron, we found a partner who not only wanted to take advantage of some of the remarkable assets, our higher education institutions, our water, but they also wanted to be our partner in solving some of those pernicious socioeconomic challenges that have held our community back. I think that's a pretty unique thing to be able to find in an economic development deal, but it is certainly a model that we are eager to recreate, as I think Central New York finds itself in a position now where we can be more selective about the partners we invite into our community, because we are now a community that is anticipated to grow, and a community that, frankly, for new employers will be in demand.
And you felt like you were part of that conversation and feel like you're going to be a part of those conversations moving forward?
No doubt about it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, absolutely. The center state folks were a critical part. The local glue, understanding in such great detail their community, telling the story with data, telling the story with people, that element was critical to our success. I mean, and the work that Center State and the community has been doing for the 10, 15 years to put them in a position to succeed. It's not just the $6.1 billion in federal, it's not just the 5.8 in state. It was this community and the trajectory it's on because of the work that's been happening here over the last 15 years is why we succeeded. It's absolutely all of those things.
So Amy, when it comes to the development of the Micron project or any really major high-tech investment in New York State, what are you concerned about? What are the promises that you're looking to see fulfilled, especially when it comes to workforce?
Yeah, great question. And just, if we go back to the video that was just shown with President Biden, it started at the federal level, right? We come at workforce development looking for good union jobs, right? That's at the table. That comes with workforce development and labor standards. And we don't have to look too far back when, we all were around in the 90s when NAFTA, with the North American Free Trade Agreement.
I was in elementary school, but I heard about it. Yes.
We were around, and there were so many companies that went to China, went to Mexico because of cheap labor and low labor standards. And it's an intentionality that we've seen in the last years at the federal government with Governor Hochul and the state legislature, of really focusing on how do we onshore those jobs, reshore that manufacturing so that New York becomes the beacon in this development, whether it's semiconductors, whether it's renewable energy projects. And in particular, when we talk about workforce development, I bring it back to those good union jobs because those are pathways out of poverty. And how do we get those disadvantaged communities to have access to those good union careers? And it takes a workforce ecosystem. We have to work with the community partners. We have to work with partners like CEO in different regions, local government, state legislatures, funding, right? Yeah. It takes a lot of money to make sure that we can't just say, okay, develop a program. We have to have the right training. The unionized building trades, they have great apprenticeships with their business contractors. And it's a joint partnership where it's state-of-the-art training. So with these new technologies comes new training, and it's all wrapped around advancing skill development, but also with safety being paramount.
Is the concern about union jobs limited just to the construction, say, of a semiconductor plant, or is this something that extends to the workforce that's going to be permanently there?
Absolutely. It is construction first because they're the ones that have to be on the ground building the projects. But there's the permanent jobs, right? So as, again, going back to what the president said, there are going to be close to 9,000 permanent jobs in the Micron facility. And how do we make sure that those workers have a voice on the job, potentially. They're going to be high earners, but there's also going to be ancillary businesses around supporting the work in Micron, right? The small to medium manufacturers that have to support the supply chain. And so with that, how do we take the gold standard of the building trades apprenticeship programs, right, which is all around career development, safety, wages, benefits, pensions, healthcare, and how do we then take that model and maybe institute it within advanced manufacturing and potentially develop apprenticeship programs there so that we partner with community colleges. We get it in the high schools so that there's youth development so that they know that, oh, I don't maybe have to go to a 4-year career. I can, partner with an employer and get that on-the-job training, earn while you learn, right? So they're getting funding and they're getting training along the way. So that's a model that we're very interested in partnering, and then making sure that there's labor peace agreements attached to these workforce development and economic development standards. And labor peace means that there's no fighting of the unionization, right? It's a mutual benefit. The employer stays on the sidelines and let the workers decide whether they want a voice on the job.
I think one of the things that's really exciting about this moment, we've said for a long time that our community ambition is to reduce the levels of socioeconomic inequality in Central New York, to create a more sustainable environment, to provide economic opportunity for individuals and families who have been historically disadvantaged throughout Central New York. While economic growth is no guarantee of greater future shared prosperity, as you've articulated well, it is sort of a necessary precondition to be able to lift people out of the condition they're currently in. We need to remember that Central New York suffered 60, 70, 80 years of socioeconomic decline, right? Population loss and wage shrinkage and job growth. And this opportunity with Micron presents a once in a generation, if not once in a lifetime opportunity to re-inject energy into that economy and to create the market forces that actually allow us to lift people throughout our community up into not only new jobs, but careers with growth opportunities. And a huge amount of the work that's going on, whether it's investments by the governor in workforce development, investments by our local partners like OCC and Syracuse University, partnerships that we're working on with other community-based organizations, is around ensuring that the jobs that are being created, not only through Micron, but throughout the rest of the advanced manufacturing supply chain and construction in Central New York, are open, are accessible, and that our that our workforce is more reflective of the true diversity of the Central New York community.
Yeah. So Kevin, how do we actually realize that, though? Because it's one thing to say that we've got a $100,000 job that Joe Biden is touting. It's another thing to actually fill that job with these people that that Rob is talking about, that in Central New York that have dealt with such terrible challenges. And so how do we make sure that they are direct beneficiaries and not necessarily the beneficiaries of hospitality jobs that open up as the result of this job growth?
It's intentionality, right? So we just announced what we call OnRamp. It's this statewide program, targeted advanced manufacturing workforce training. It's modeled after the Northland Workforce Training Center in Buffalo, and Northland is intentionally placed on the east side of Buffalo. It's a sort of workforce development site that brings together all of the partners. Training in that facility is provided by the community colleges, but it's in a place that's really accessible. Like, it is in a place where folks that are historically on the outside looking in have the opportunity to be there and get the workforce training. The other thing that's really important is if you're providing this workforce training to disadvantaged populations, you can't simply give them the training and say, okay, go get it, good luck. If you want success, you've got to provide these wraparound services, support people in a more robust way to succeed, and that's what happens at Northland. And so on the Northland campus, the community colleges do the training. Their success rate at Northland is multiples in terms of folks coming in the door and graduating, is multiples of what the community colleges are doing off their campus because of these wraparound services, right? And so success rate is higher, both in terms of completion and placement into the workforce is higher because a key partner is the industry. Industry drives their partners, they drive the development of their curriculum. Having that part, the industry partners drive a curriculum means the workforce training gets these folks into jobs at those partners. So you've got industry-driven workforce development training. You've got the wraparound services targeted and accessible to disadvantaged populations with the wraparound services necessary to success. We're doing it here. We're doing it with the Syracuse builds. And what we're doing is we're taking those things and scaling them, those successful models and scaling. So on-ramp, you take on Northland Workforce Training, we're bringing it here to Central New York. That's our sort of first flagship investment around Micron in the moment here. But this is also going to happen throughout the rest of upstate. And so how do you do it? That is really how you do it.
And just to go a little bit further on what Kevin was saying, in Buffalo, and not only in Buffalo, but the building trades have pre-apprentice programs. Yeah. And the pre-apprentice programs give folks who are the community-based organizations, they are direct entry into apprenticeship programs. So, for example, there's this great group, Center for Employment Opportunities, and they're working with the Justice Involved. They're partnering right now in the city of Buffalo with the laborers. And so they're taking their graduates from CEO and they're going into a pre-apprentice program and knowing that after a 4 to 6 weeks program, they have direct entry into the laborers apprenticeship program. So yes, they're doing whatever the current work is in Buffalo, but it's scaling up to maybe the new project of the 33 or the Buffalo Bills Stadium. And with that, we know that those are groups that have systemic barriers, right? It's not just, as Kevin said, get them a job, get them training, they're okay, and they move on. What is it that they need? Most folks in disadvantaged communities, they have trouble with transportation. So it's one thing to get them trained, but then the job sites are not near their communities where they live, right? So we're actively trying to figure out, how do we get them driver's license? How do we lean on public transportation? How do we do creative shuttle services to the job sites? But one thing that WDI is working on is our child care program. And childcare is, an essential workforce support. And I know the counties have subsidy programs themselves, but what the legislature just passed in the state budget with the help of the governor and our stalwart leaders, Assemblyman Harry Bronson, Labor Chair, as well as Labor Chair Senator Ramos, fought for a program that WDI we're administering our own scholarship program. So our scholarship program helps families who are above those that would be able to access those subsidies at the county level, and that make just a little bit more. That if, it depends, right? You have a two-family household, the high cost of childcare is close to $15,000 a year for infants to 5-year-olds. It's unattainable, right? So sometimes people have to choose to go home. Our scholarship program takes that off the table. They're able to go to work, which again helps more women get into the workforce. And the other good thing about our scholarship program, we're partnering with the Office of Temporary Disability Insurance, and they have their migrant relocation assistance program. And we know there's lots of migrants coming upstate New York, which is another untapped workforce. They need immediate skills training. They need language barriers. They need soft skills. But at the same time, they're going to need childcare. And since our program is state funded, we're able to come in and help them on their path to citizenship to provide those families with childcare so that they can get immediately into the workforce.
And I want to stick with childcare. And Kevin, Amy brings up the idea of increasing subsidies, but it's a pointless endeavor if there isn't the workforce to actually do that work. As a state, do we need to focus more on the idea that economic development in New York is really only possible with a thriving childcare workforce? And if that is something that we agree on, do we need to invest economic development dollars in a meaningful way into that workforce?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I mean, and so as I think we talked a little bit about, the governor introduced what's called the Office of Strategic Workforce Development. And what is that office? That office is very intentionally targeted around industries where there is a need. And to make sure any workforce training programs we do, there is those additional, so you have the partners who are willing to provide the childcare, who are going to go above and beyond in terms of opportunities for childcare, for wraparound services. So any workforce training we're doing is absolutely, childcare is a big part of it. The Green Chips program, childcare is a key element of it. Micron, for example, Global Foundries, both have committed to actually building childcare facilities, either on-site or proximate to their facilities. So absolutely, I think childcare workforce is something I know the governor's talked a lot about, and Amy could probably speak better to than I can, but it's something we've got to make sure that folks are there to take care of the children while other folks are doing the other jobs. Yeah.
One of the things I just want to pull up to 30,000 feet for a second, because I think sometimes we get caught in this trap that somehow economic growth and community prosperity are somehow at opposition with one another. And I think one thing that we've learned in this project is that's not in fact the case. And what we've had in this discussion with Micron, I think at every step of the way, is a really robust partnership between our public sector partners, between a company like Micron who shares a lot of our community values, who have come together and worked to try to address these issues, right? As Kevin mentioned, childcare on site, that Micron made that commitment as part of negotiating the deal with New York State and with the state and local governments. Within a week of the Micron announcement, our Regional Transportation Authority had agreed to run express service from the downtown public transportation station right out to the site, right? To make sure that we were creating opportunities and eliminating transportation barriers. The company themselves has negotiated with New York State, one of the largest community investment frameworks in the history of the country, right? And this was done not in a confrontational way, not in an argumentative way, but it was done in a methodology where we articulated our shared values around inclusion and shared prosperity for people in Central New York, along with ensuring Micron's ability to be competitive in a highly competitive global market for semiconductor manufacturing. And working along those two core values at every step of the way, ensuring intentionality, including Micron putting $250 million of their own money into a large-scale community investment fund that has a priority. The state matched it with $100 million. Priorities to build, housing and affordable housing, key community amenities, education, workforce development. I just want to remind folks that sometimes these discussions end up polarized. And I think that's part of what people find so frustrating at the national level is every discussion about anything difficult ends up polarized. If hopefully we've done one thing here in Central New York with the Micron deal, it's model a different approach that is collaborative and designed to support everyone's mutual interests.
It's a funny anecdote when we're negotiating with Micron. The way they post-mortem describe it is, New York comes in and every other state was coming in and saying, very solicitous, what can we do for you? How can we help you? How can we make you choose us? And they felt like we came in and interviewed them. And, I think
we did.
I think we did, yeah. So, but hey, if we're going to invest the substantial public resources in you, are you going to partner with us on the things we care about? Do you care about childcare? Do you care about diversity? Do you care about workforce development? And so we had to know who they were and how they were aligned with us, and they were, and they are. And so, yeah, that's right. We were interviewing them because if we're going to make those investments, we need to know we have a partner who's going to line up with us on the things that we care about.
So we're actually going to take a break from our conversation right now, and we're going to turn our attention to a new jobs program that was created in the state budget this spring. It's a $30 million annual refundable tax credit intended to support jobs at news outlets around New York. We spoke recently about this effort with Zach Richner, a founding member of the Empire State Local News Coalition. Here's that story. Well, Zach, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
So for starters, why is it in the state's interest to subsidize local newsrooms all over New York?
Well, it's a great question, and I commend the governor and all the elected officials, especially Senator Hoylman, who made this happen. And local news is the lifeblood of communities. I mean, we see what happens when a community loses their source of local news. There's real data now that show that communities have increased political polarization, decreased voter turnout. It's even an economic issue to people because when you don't have that watchdog in your community, you have higher taxes for residents, and we certainly don't want to see that happen here in New York. But there's no other person out in the field covering your local school board meeting, your high school soccer game, and the feel-good stories too, your marriages, who made the honor roll. So we want to do everything we can to protect local news and make sure communities have the information and all the good news that they deserve.
So this year's recently adopted budget includes $30 million for the program with a plan to roll this out over 3 years. How do you envision this working once the money does become available? What does it mean to broadcasters and newspapers alike?
So this is certainly going to save dozens, if not more, news organizations just over the next 12 months. I mean, we see, or we've seen in the last 20 years, hundreds of newspapers in our state go out of business. And that means that there are hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers that don't have that source of local news. So this tax credit, $30 million, we know that that's a very small percentage of a $200+ billion state budget, but for local newsrooms where you might have one reporter or 5 reporters, it is going to make a meaningful difference in the viability of those news organizations and the ability for these organizations to not only retain their news staff, but our hope is to grow it.
Well, yeah, the refundable tax credit, it's a 50% refundable credit against the first $50,000 of an eligible employee's salary. So do you believe this is just about holding the line on staffing levels, or is there reason to believe that it'll actually lead to growing newsrooms, something we haven't seen in a long time here in New York?
So we do think that it'll actually grow newsrooms. And there are many publishers we've spoken to who have said that they expect to hire more people or to take people from freelancing to W-2s because of this tax credit. And the way that $30 million is actually divided, there's a $4 million carve out specifically for new employees. So there are incentives in the legislation to grow headcount, and we are optimistic that will happen.
A lot of the details of the implementation of this tax credit are left up to some of the state officials at Empire State Development, and their regulations are still pending at this point. So when they do write regulations, though, what do you want to see in terms of who's covered, whether it's certain outlets or what types of positions are covered?
So we want to make sure that the organizations and New Yorkers that benefit from this are the people that need it most. So those are local communities, local newsrooms. So we want to make sure that this is as targeted as possible to local news, and also that it's kind of the other side of the same coin is we want to make sure that it's as inclusive as possible when it comes to types of entities that qualify. So we want to make sure that it's the S Corps, the C Corps, the LLCs, the nonprofits, the digital onlys, the traditional print newspapers, broadcasters. If you are providing local news to communities with real journalists, we want to, or we hope that the regulators will write the language in a way that includes them. So we will continue to advocate for all news, local news outlets, and hope that the Empire State Development team hears us and writes this in a way that is beneficial to everybody.
And in terms of the positions that are covered, would they be limited to just the newsroom of an outlet, or would other positions potentially be benefiting from this? And if so, what's the reason for expanding it beyond, say, just journalists?
So I think that's something that also has to be worked out during the regulatory process. The reason for it expanding beyond newsrooms would be because there's a lot of other people that go into making a news outlet function. So it would be certainly wonderful if we didn't have to deal with the reality of all the expenses that come with running any sort of organization, but particularly a news organization. There are sales teams, finance teams, HR support, all of this that is required to support a business that can exist to provide local news to communities. So I think sometimes we might get a bit blinded by the fact that there's a whole host of other people, and these are good paying jobs that New Yorkers have, that are supporting the journalists that are in many times the face of a newspaper or broadcast station.
And do you envision this being a permanent subsidy, or is this something that you hope news outlets can wean themselves off after a certain amount of time?
The proof will be in the pudding as far as how effective this is. We think that it's going to be very effective, and we will see very quickly the benefits that this provides to news organizations and the communities they serve. And if you look to something like the film tax credit, which started kind of at a similar size, that has continued to expand because of all the economic benefits that it brings to our great state. So
well, there's some debate about that, but that's grown to be a $700 million program. So should the journalism majors out there thinking about the profession think, well, eventually this is going to grow to $30 million to $700 million? Or is this something where you view this tax credit as kind of a bridge to a stable business model for some of these outlets that have really struggled with the transition to the digital era?
Yeah, so I don't think they're mutually exclusive, actually. I think that, I can't predict the future as to how big or this might eventually get. But certainly having this tax credit does allow news organizations to invest their money in new business models and to plan for the future a bit better now that this is a multi-year tax credit. I believe that we will see not just the economic benefits of this, but also the civic benefits of it, and there will be a very strong case to continue and expand this tax credit in the future.
Any concerns about messy entanglements? For example, you might have government reporters who benefit from this credit reporting on the very policymakers who are responsible for doling it out.
Yeah, it's a very valid issue to raise. What we've done with this tax credit is constructed in a way that we think mitigates the largest extent possible that concern, because the requirements or qualifications for getting this tax credit are completely objective, and that takes a lot of the ability for a government to weaponize this off the table. Now, I also think that we as an industry need to have a little bit more faith in our own integrity when we talk about this issue, because we've been dealing with this issue for forever. We have a subsidy from the U.S. government when it comes to postal rates. This never really gets brought up when we talk about covering businesses. We have advertisers every day in our newspapers, on our TV and radio stations. So I think we've shown in the past that, for the most part, we've been able to handle this with objectivity and maintaining our journalistic integrity. And I'm really encouraged by just the objectivity of a tax credit and how that will ensure that we can continue with that journalistic integrity.
Well, we've been speaking with Zach Richner. He's the director of Richner Communications, a Long Island-based publisher and a founding member of the Empire State Local News Coalition. Zach, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dave.
So Kevin, as we just saw in that package, this year's budget includes about $30 million to promote jobs in the journalism industry, and that's on top of hundreds of millions of dollars of other targeted economic development tax credits. And we were talking earlier about the billions of dollars coming to Micron. When you think about what it takes to create or even retain jobs in New York now, is it the case that economic development is really based around subsidies or tax incentives? Is that just a key ingredient that we have to live with? Or is there anything that can be done in the long term to move away from that dynamic?
I think in the competitive environment that we were in, within both nationally with other states and internationally with other countries, it is a part of economic development for sure. That's just the reality. I think any of us, in a perfect world, if nobody was doing this, then we shouldn't do it.
Mutual disarmament.
Yeah, but I remember there was a guy, I don't know if you remember Richard Brodsky, an assemblyman.
I do.
So Richard was not a fan of economic development incentives, and I think referred to as a corporate welfare. But he said this. He said, but I can't ask. I'm not a fan of what you do, but I can't ask you to unilaterally disarm, right? And so in the world that we live in terms of competing with other states, competing with other countries, it is a necessary prerequisite to economic development, for sure. Now, it's not it. That's what as we've been talking about. You talk about workforce, you talk about infrastructure, you talk about just sustainability. All of those things are key to the full ecosystem, but incentives certainly are.
Well, Rob, when we think about the atmosphere of incentives, a lot of it is targeting new job creation, and sometimes you're left with those existing employers who say, what about me? And sometimes, like journalists, they get their payout coming one day. But other people are still excluded from the subsidies, whether it is direct cash benefits or tax incentives. What do you hear from local employers who are shut out about that? Is this a recurring concern for them? Do they wish that the overall tax environment could be better? Are there other infrastructure needs they have? What do you hear?
Yeah, listen, I mean, I think everybody would, I think everybody in the business community would be interested in trying to continue to drive down the tax environment, whether it's your local property tax burden or the burden at the state level. I think the reality is, though, in New York State, we've made some great strides. I think the fact that we have zero tax for manufacturers in New York State is a really big deal. Why is that a big deal today? It's a big deal today because so much of the economic growth that not only the state but this country has the potential to benefit from in the next 10 or 15 years are the reshoring of manufacturing jobs that were once lost from all of our communities across upstate New York. So as we're out there talking with partners around doing business in New York State, things like that do matter. But I want to go back to what Kevin said. Fundamentally, economic development is not just about incentives. Economic development is about understanding your community assets, whether it's your human assets, your intellectual assets, your academic assets, your natural resources, and leveraging those into a value proposition for business, right? How can you help a business, whether it's a high-tech company, a manufacturer, a service sector business, how can you help them achieve their business goals, which are often profitability and growing their market share? There are a lot of different ways that we can do that, but certainly incentives are a key part of the toolkit. And I think they should be. I think one of the things I give New York State a lot of credit for is that when I came back to New York State 21 years ago, many of the incentive programs in the state were not pay-for-performance-based programs. Today, they all are, right? Companies have to deliver on their promises of capital investment, job creation, job retention, in order to get even a single dollar out of most of these state programs and local programs. And I think that's the way it should be. I think people do deserve transparency and accountability around economic development, but done right, these incentive programs create more value than they cost. And I think that's incredibly important to acknowledge. A lot of work goes into sizing investments to ensure that that there is a return on investment for the state, for our local partners. And I know that's something that everyone in the economic development world that I interact with, they take that responsibility really seriously.
Amy, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think where it does work, there's transparency. Stakeholders are at the table. It's business, it's labor, it's workforce development, it's community partners. And how then does that tax incentive incentivize then back to the community with community benefit agreements. I think where some of them aren't working are with the localized IDAs, industrial development agencies. There's been some transparency regulations that have been put into effect where the controller, does do some auditing of, what those incentive in job creation have created, but there are many that get these tax incentives where they're not creating jobs, and it's a suck and a drain on some of the communities. And what the movement now is, there's school districts that are losing that tax base, right? And sometimes they have to lay off teachers or close programs because of these small, on local municipalities are giving these tax breaks. And one way to help advance or have more transparency is to have labor seats on the table, have school districts part of that process, so it's not just, the IDAs, saying, yes, this looks good, we'll give them a tax abatement, and then all of a sudden, the jobs they don't create, they don't reach their level of commitment. So I think modeling and after what ESD is doing and that transparency and making sure there's performance and job requirements and workforce development attached to it, I think that's the next level, moving IDAs to be more transparent and accountable in their operations.
I would just point out that there is a remarkable amount of transparency that's already required of our IDAs in New York State, and I think the vast majority of them do an incredibly good job. I'm really proud of our local partners here in Central New York. They run good organizations, and we're all familiar with some of the headlines of places where there's a project here or there that maybe didn't live up to the standard that people expect. I think the concern that I have sometimes is that we label or try to paint all IDAs with the same brush. The reality is that these are critically important tools for our local communities as we try to encourage projects like Micron. Were it not for the Onondaga County IDA, we would probably not have let me just say it clearly, we would not have Micron in Central New York because of the role they did to not only assemble the site, but some of the tax benefits that they've been able to convey. These are critical partners in our effort to rebuild our upstate New York communities. And I want to bring us back to where we were at the beginning of this conversation, which is our communities across upstate New York have suffered 60, 70, 80, in some cases 90 years of socioeconomic decline. When I moved back here in 2003, the single most important message that I heard from every business owner, from every resident, was we do not have enough jobs and there's not a clear economic future for our community. And so as we think about creating sustainable communities, more equitable communities, generating meaningful economic growth, and putting upstate New York back on a map where we are globally relevant, has been a critical part of the strategy. And that comes with needing to line up every tool and every incentive you can. And now, as a result of that work, and all of those partners, including our IDAs and state government and tax credits and the federal government, now we are in a position where upstate New York, from the Hudson Valley all the way through western New York, we are in the front row seat for the manufacturing of the most critical input to the modern economy, semiconductors. Right? We are now back in a place of global relevance. Upstate New York and our manufacturing that will be happening here not only matters to New York State and to each of our communities, but it matters to the federal government. Our economic competitiveness as a country and our national security depend on what's going to be happening here.
So that's kind of the best case scenario, but to flesh out some of the issues that Amy raised, you have IDAs who are giving out grants for like a fast food restaurant, for businesses that have said publicly, we were going to do this project regardless, but thanks for the money. You also have some who fight their regulators when it comes time to actually be disclosing certain information. And one of the things, though, that really I sort of get hung up on is the idea that about 14 years ago, then Governor Andrew Cuomo came in with these regional economic development councils, and they were based on this idea that as a state, we need to be more regionally focused. An IDA seems to be like hyper-focused on the local needs. And I'm curious if anybody has any concerns about the IDAs basically competing with each other in New York, or whether you feel like there is a role for them to play in going to bat for their New York community versus potentially another New York community.
I think the regional councils, the effect of bringing everybody together in the region, there's not a regional representative, it is all of the partners, including the IDAs in the region. And there's an alignment, there's an alignment with strategy. There's bringing folks together to share best practices. And the IDAs are part of that alignment. They really are. Just like the multiple universities, the multiple employers, right? They all have different interests, but they come together, do a real strategic analysis of who they are and who they want to be, and then try to row together. And that, I will tell you, I started this job 17 years ago, and it's a very different collaborative approach within the regions, including all partners. Are there people doing their own thing? Absolutely, but there is a much more collaborative approach at the regional level and a respect of those regional strategies from the state level. This idea that the state knows what's good for you, go ahead, we'll do it for you, is not the case. And so the IDAs are part of that, a part of those regional convenings, and that's an important thing. You want them in the tent, right? You want everybody in the tent, and I think that's what the regional councils do.
I'll just say, for our experience, we don't see our local IDAs competing with each other to steal business across a county line or across a city line. That's I've heard that talking point for 20 plus years. It just doesn't happen, at least here in Central New York, and for the most part, we actually see our IDAs collaborate, share information, try to work on regional strategy, understand how their assets line up, and can be mutually supportive. But I think that we are in a moment now, thanks to so much hard work and collaboration. We're in a moment where we have a chance to fundamentally transform the upstate New York economy. And I would just encourage us all, now is not the time to take the foot off the gas or to disinvest in strategies that over the course of the last 10 years plus have proven to be working. Our economy in Central New York is growing again. Our population in Central New York is growing again for the first time in 90 years, right? The things that we've been doing over the course of the last decade or two are driving progress. We're moving and being intentional about how we're lifting people that have been historically marginalized into opportunity and trying to ensure that more of our future prosperity is shared. And it takes all of those tools, all of those incentives, and frankly more in order to be able to ensure that the outcome from these investments are the ones that we want, right? And I think that is just the focus. It needs to be the focus of all of our community leaders. We can get caught up in small fights and arguments here or there, but for the most part, finding alignment to continue to pursue our strategy, drive economic growth, and drive shared prosperity, I think is where our collective focus needs to be.
Amy, we only have a couple minutes, but do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's semiconductor, absolutely, but we can't forget about renewable energy, which is just, crosses all across New York State. We talk about the offshore wind projects off the coast of Long Island. We know that that's happening there and in New York City. But just as important, right, our upstate communities, how do they fit into the supply chain? I think it was intentional, right, from NYSERDA and the governor to make sure that with the CLCPA, that it's just not benefiting the downstate communities. How do we plug in to those disadvantaged communities who have been left off, who had those power plants in their backyard, whose children have high rates of asthma? Well, let's make sure that they're part of that economic success and have them potentially part of the supply chain with these manufacturers, with the building and construction trades, making sure that the building trades who have traditionally, done the electrification in buildings, well then what are those skills that they need to install charging stations all across New York State to make sure that there is a pipeline and a systematic from Long Island to New York City, Westchester, Central New York out to Buffalo. It's that ecosystem of not only economic development, but making sure the workforce is trained every step of the way with new technologies, added certifications. Let's face it, right? This electrification in New York State, we're dealing with high voltage, right, systems. Well, that's going to be new for not just the electricians, but for folks who are maintaining those facilities. We talked about earlier, I won't get too much into it, but we're moving towards the electrification of school buses, right? Folks who have dealt with combustible engines where they're working on oil changes. Well, now they have to know, how to diagnose the batteries that are running these. How are they making sure that they're charged? So workforce development is just as economic development, as vast and varied, but it is as long as it's part of a discussion with economic development, it goes hand in hand. I think, it's a win-win for workers and employers.
Only about 30 seconds left, but Kevin, in light of what Amy just brought up, is ESD particularly involved with all the different elements of the green transition, whether it is NYPA handing out cheap power or NYSERDA with the offshore wind? I mean, you got about 15, 20 seconds.
Absolutely. Work closely with all those partners every day. I think we talk about green chips quite a bit, but there's also an enhancement around this Excelsior program around sustainable projects, very similar to the green chips in terms of the nature and the amount of the incentives that are targeted. But yeah, you think about the future, sustainability, semiconductors, and the high-tech sort of AI, and those spaces, we're seeing a tremendous amount of investment privately, but also that tremendous amount of investment from state government and local government. But it's done in a way that also includes, workforce, housing, childcare, really thinking about all the things that are necessary to support the economy.
I think the thing
unfortunately, we're going to have to save that and the AI talk for the second hour of Connect New York, because that's all the time we have today. My thanks to Kevin Eunice, Amy Desjardins, and Robert Simpson for spending time with us today. If you'd like to revisit this episode or dig into the Connect New York archives, visit wcny.org/Connect New York. And for more state government coverage, check out the Capitol Press Room at capitolpressroom.org or wherever you download podcasts. On behalf of the entire team at WCNY, I'm David Lombardo. Thanks for watching.
This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.
Connect New York is sponsored by James Jordan Associates Architects, providing professional architectural services to educational, commercial, and institutional clients throughout New York State. James Jordan Associates Architects, with offices in Richfield Springs, New York.
Geddes Federal Savings and Loan offers home loans, IRAs, money market, checking, and savings accounts.
Geddes Federal, how can I help you this morning?
Personal service. Get it at Geddes. Offices in Westvale Plaza and in Manlius.